Well, good morning. Thank you, President Wilson, for those very kind words, and thank you all for such a warm welcome. It's a pleasure to join you on this really beautiful campus on this really beautiful and glorious day, and it's a privilege to stand with so many distinguished faculty, staff, and administrators, members of the Board of Regents, and proud family, members, friends, and alumni in congratulating the Morgan State University class of 2014. I'd like to also thank Calvin Butler for his thoughtful remarks. He made the right decision in not being an associate at a law firm. Though for those of you who are thinking about private practice, you can get through it, so don't take what he did or what I did and think that you shouldn't do that. I also want to thank Chairman and former Congressman and NAACP President Kwesi Nkrumah for his inspiring words and his service to our nation over the course of his exemplary career. I was telling him before we came out, I need him back in Congress. If you all have seen some of my interactions with folks there, you gotta help me out, brother. I'd also like to recognize every member of Morgan State's renowned choir and band for sharing their talents with us. That was truly outstanding, and you all are very gifted musicians. You all know Flashlight? You know, I love you all, but these are my people over here, class of 1964. Flashlight, right? There we go. So I want to thank you all for making today's ceremony really so special. And thank you most of all to the class of 2014 for inviting me to share this moment with you as we mark the end of one chapter of your lives and celebrate the beginning of the next. How's it feel, 2014? How's it feel? Now, I know that each of you walked a difficult path to be here today. A path beset by challenges, some prescribed by your professors to test your knowledge and skills, others by outside circumstances, and some by societal factors that were beyond your control. Every obstacle, every paper, and every project, every midterm, every final exam, just think, you don't have to do that anymore. I know you're so sad about that. All of these obstacles had to be confronted and overcome before you could take your seat among this very distinguished crowd. And while we applaud your individual achievements today and we celebrate your collective victories, and we commemorate what is truly a significant milestone, the fact is that for all the work, for all the studying, and for all the sleepless nights, none of you made this journey alone. In so many ways, the path that led you to this moment was forged by men and women who came before you. Many seemingly ordinary, but all really extraordinary. From those who pioneered the establishment of this great school more than 140 years ago, those who first opened its doors to women, and later to students of all races and backgrounds. But each of their journeys was less certain. They had no set course to guide them, and they must have found at times that there was no obvious way forward, and nothing but darkness and difficulty stretching out ahead. Their path lit only by the flame of America's founding promise. Now, there were courageous individuals, from Reverend Joseph Albert Delane to Sarah Bowling to Oliver Brown, who stood up and who spoke out, often at great personal cost, for what they knew to be right. They were civil rights advocates and attorneys like Robert Carter, Jack Greenberg, and Baltimore's own Thurgood Marshall, who translated a growing, restless movement into a focused fight for legal change. And there were eminent jurists like Chief Justice Earl Warren and his 8 colleagues on the United States Supreme Court, who, as has been told, exactly 60 years ago today, unanimously declared in Brown versus the Board of Education that separate was inherently unequal, and that racial segregation ran contrary to the Constitution's guarantee of equal protection under law. Now, at the time of this revolutionary ruling, I was just 3 years old and still a few years away from starting school. My generation was the first to come of age in a post-Brown America. And although the vestiges of state-sanctioned discrimination affected many aspects of our lives and continue to reverberate across the country even today in 2014, thanks to Brown and to those who made it possible, your generation will never know a world in which separate but equal was the law of the land. Now, of course, if that era seems like ancient history to you, that's only because your forebears, including members of the class of '64, who are here with us today, they came together to make it ancient history. In the wake of Brown versus the board, people of all ages and from every corner of our nation were inspired and were emboldened by the courage, the conviction, and the persistence of those who risked so much in the fight for freedom and for justice. Today, as you walk across this stage, each of you will take your rightful place as their heirs and as the heirs of these pioneers, from the freedom riders who defied prejudice to travel through the segregated South, to the marchers in Selma and in Birmingham who risked their lives for a dream they knew they might never live to see, from hundreds of students right here at Morgan who helped to initiate the national sit-in movement, to a young man named Robert Bell, who would go on to graduate from Morgan State and who in 1960, at just 16 years of age, was arrested for participating in a sit-in in a Baltimore restaurant that served only white customers. Following his arrest, Robert Bell became the lead appellant in a landmark civil rights case known as Bell versus Maryland, which ultimately pushed the state and the entire country closer to desegregation. He and his fellow students were represented by legendary lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley. And after that victory, and after his graduation from Fair Morgan, Robert went on to attend Harvard Law School, and he eventually became the first African-American chief judge to serve on the highest court in Maryland, retiring just last year. Now, Chief Judge Bell's journey started right here in Baltimore when he was not much younger than many of you. Despite their age, he and his classmates rose to the greatest moral challenge of their time. They devoted themselves to the cause of justice in the face of adversity that to us would be in some ways unthinkable. And in so doing, they not only overcame obstacles, they transcended history. They helped to pull this nation closer to its founding ideals, and many of them sat where you all sit today. So to the class of 2014, Chief Judge Bell's achievements and his extraordinary life story should be more than just an inspiration. They stand as a challenge to every young woman and young man who walks in his footsteps. They should drive you to question that which is accepted truth. Dare to reach beyond yourselves. Aim as he did, not merely to witness history, but to make it. And strive to live up to the singular legacy that belongs to each Morgan graduate by virtue of the history that you now inherit, the milestone anniversary that we observe today, and the profound sacrifices endured by the trailblazers on whose shoulders you now stand. Now, when I think of these sacrifices, I think of and I thank both of my parents, whom I love, admire, and who I miss each and every day. I think in particular of my father, who immigrated to this country as a young boy many years ago from Barbados, who enlisted in the military during World War II when he was close to 40 years old, and who proudly wore the uniform of the United States Army during his service in the war. Now, when I reflect on the power of individual determination, I think of that same great man who was denied service at a lunch counter and was told to leave a white Sunday train even though he was wearing the uniform of his country, a uniform of which he was proud and which he treasured throughout his life. And when when I think of the duties, the rights, and the weighty responsibilities of American citizenship, responsibilities that are now entrusted to each of you, I think of that man, my father, for whom I am named, who never lost faith in the greatness of his country, even when it did not reciprocate his devotion. A man who never stopped believing in the promise of this nation, even when that promise was obscured by injustice. And a man whose dedication to preserving the American dream ran so deep that he put his life on the line to defend that dream the moment it was threatened. He worked hard, along with my mother, to give my brother and me every opportunity to succeed, and who taught us by word and by deed that this country's true greatness lives in its greatest aspirations and in the power of every citizen to chart our nation's course and build a brighter future together. So today, as we celebrate an inflection point in American history and mark the commencement of over 850 new leaders, each of you blessed by a sense of opportunity and possibility that would have been unimaginable just a few short years ago, I urge you to be mindful of the history that we share. I implore you to remember, as you work to grow the future and lead the world, that you are part of something, that you are heirs to a legacy that is much larger than yourselves. You owe a tremendous debt to all who came before, your grandparents, your parents, to those who built this nation while it held them in chains, to those who served their country, even when its businesses and schools refused to serve them, to those who marched for the ideals that we've always held sacred, to those who carried this fight from our city streets all the way to the highest court in the land. As you move forward from this moment, you must resolve to be both serious about your life choices and respectful of your proud and singular past. Wherever you go and whatever you do, you must find your own unique ways to contribute, to blaze a path for the next generation of Morgan graduates, and to keep challenging this nation to become even greater, even fairer, and even more committed to its founding ideals. After all, there can be no question, as I look over this crowd, that our country has come a long way on the road to equality and opportunity. There's also no denying that the struggle is far from over. Critical work remains unfinished, and the expansion of this progress constitutes a sacred charge that tomorrow's leaders must strive to fulfill, that you must fulfill. Now, over the last few weeks and the last few months, we have seen occasional jarring reminders of the discrimination and the isolated, repugnant, racist views that in some places have yet to be overcome. These incidents have received substantial media coverage, and they've regularly been condemned by leaders, by commentators, and citizens from all backgrounds, and all people from all walks of life. But we ought not find contentment in the fact that these high-profile expressions of outright bigotry seem atypical and were met with such swift condemnation. Because if we focus solely on these incidents, on outlandish statements that capture national attention and spark outrage on Facebook and on Twitter, we are likely to miss the more hidden and more troubling reality behind the headlines. These outbursts of bigotry, while deplorable, are not the true markers of the struggle that still must be waged or the work that still needs to be done, because the greatest threats do not announce themselves in screaming headlines. They are more subtle, they cut deeper, and their terrible impact endures long after the headlines have faded and obvious ignorant expressions of hatred have been marginalized. Nor does the greatest threat to equal opportunity any longer reside in overtly discriminatory statutes like separate but equal laws of 60 years ago. Since the era of Brown, laws making classifications based on race have been subjected to a legal standard known as strict scrutiny. Almost invariably, these statutes, when tested, fail to pass constitutional muster. But there are other policies that too easily escape such scrutiny because they have the appearance of being race neutral. Their impacts, however, are anything but. And this is the concern we must contend with today. Policies that impede equal opportunity, in fact, if not in form. Codified segregation of public schools has been barred since Brown, but in too many of our school districts, significant divisions persist and segregation has reoccurred, including zero-tolerance school discipline practices that, while well-intentioned and aimed at promoting school safety, affect black males at a rate 3 times higher than their white peers. There are other examples. For instance, in our criminal justice system, systemic and unwarranted racial disparities remain disturbingly common. One study released just last year by the United States Sentencing Commission indicated that in recent years, African American men have received sentences that are nearly 20% longer than those imposed on white males convicted of similar crimes. Another report showed that American Indians are often sentenced even more harshly. The Justice Department is examining these and other disparities as we speak, and taking a variety of steps to ensure fair sentences that match the conduct at issue in individual cases. Like a growing chorus of lawmakers across the political spectrum, we recognize that disparate outcomes are not only shameful and unacceptable, they impede our ability to see that justice is done. And they perpetuate cycles of poverty, crime, and incarceration that trap individuals, destroy communities, and decimate minority neighborhoods. And until the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, African Americans' right to the franchise was aggressively and strictly based solely on race. Well, today, such overt measures cannot survive. Yet, in too many jurisdictions, new types of restrictions are justified as attempts to curb an epidemic of voter fraud that in reality has never been shown to exist. Rather than addressing a supposedly widespread problem, these policies disproportionately disenfranchise, again, African Americans, Hispanics, other communities of color, and vulnerable populations such as the elderly. Interfering with or depriving a person of the right to vote should never be a political aim. It is a moral failing. In recent years, thousands of Americans, the pride of our nation, have given their lives and deal today even with the scars of war so that hopeful, striving people who live continents away can proudly hold up their purple fingers after voting in a truly democratic process. America is now 50 years away from freedom summer, and we must not countenance within our own borders practices that would make it difficult or impossible to exercise the right for which so many have given so much. Our country is stronger when all Americans are treated equally. If we know that boys and young men of color have historically and consistently faced some of the most severe challenges to success. Through the President's My Brother's Keeper initiative, agencies across the federal government are identifying ways to help. This initiative is called to action. It includes foundations, corporations, community leaders, and you, because we must all work together to broaden horizons for younger generations, just as our predecessors did. This is the work that truly matters, because policies that disenfranchise specific groups are pernicious, and they are more pernicious than hateful rants. Proposals that feed uncertainty, question the desire of a people to work, and relegate particular Americans to economic despair are more malignant than intolerant public statements, no matter how many eyebrows those outbursts might raise. And a criminal justice system that treats groups of people differently and punishes them unequally has a much more negative impact than misguided words we can reject out of hand. Chief Justice John Roberts has argued that the path to ending racial discrimination is to give less consideration to the issue of race altogether. This presupposes that racial discrimination is at a sufficiently low ebb that it doesn't need to be actively confronted. In its most obvious forms, it might be. But discrimination does not always come in the form of a hateful epithet or a Jim Crow-like statute. And so we must continue to take account of racial inequality, especially in its less obvious forms, and actively discuss ways to combat it. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote recently in an insightful dissent in the Michigan College admissions case, we must not, and I quote her, we must not wish away rather than confront the racial inequality that exists in our society. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race. Of course, talking forthrightly about these difficult issues, building a constructive and inclusive national dialogue will not by itself be sufficient to address them. But it's a necessary first step that must lead to action. Our most serious and systemic challenges are too often dismissed or oversimplified or blamed on politics. We do ourselves and our great nation a great disservice whenever we reach for easy answers or revert to stale talking points. Whenever we fall victim to old paradigms and traditional habits of thought, and whenever we trade the noisy discourse, honest, tough, and vigorous debate for the quiet prejudices of inaction and the cold silence of dissent. Indeed, if our history is any guide, fostering a positive national dialogue is the best way to keep building on the achievements of our past as we look to the future. Brown, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, sweeping reforms like Head Start, Medicare, Medicaid, and yes, the Affordable Care Act, which is already helping millions of young people like you get quality, affordable health insurance. The last half century has witnessed extraordinary steps forward. And each of these achievements was made possible by driven, determined individuals, many of whom were no more and no less qualified than each of you. Progress can be achingly slow, but in this country, as a courtroom full of men and women is reminded 6 decades ago, our destiny is of our own design. Your future and your children's futures will be shaped by what you do today, tomorrow, and every day after that. History will be written by the graduates before you, by the stands that you take, and by the challenges that you accept. After all, 60 years ago and one day ago, 60 years and one day ago, schools and other public accommodations could legally refuse entry to men like my father. Today, that devoted soldier's son stands before you as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States of America. Proudly serving in the administration of the first African-American president to lead this nation. That, it seems to me, is a powerful illustration of the greatness and of the possibility that is America, and the debt that we owe to all who have dedicated their lives to building the more just and more perfect union that remains our common pursuit. As graduates of Morgan State University, you have been given a rare chance to follow in the footsteps of giants. No matter what degree you have attained or what direction your life and career will take you when you leave this campus. So as you fan out across Maryland, all around this great country, I urge you to find ways to serve your communities and to give back to our nation. Never hesitate to ask difficult questions or call attention to uncomfortable truths. And work above all to promote understanding, to foster inclusion, and to push our nation forward. Class of 2014, I look forward to all that you will do and achieve from this moment on. Know that your opportunities are constrained only by the power of your imaginations and the strength of your collective will. And always remember that so long as you stay true to the principles that define us, and the history that is now yours to shape, your potential is truly without limit. Our past stretches behind you, and a boundless future awaits, a future that we can and must build together. So congratulations again on this considerable achievement, and good luck to each and every one.